to Jake Jackets. Gear up to fire the cannon and hit the ice with your host, Jay Ashdown and Jake Gehringer.
I'm doing well. Cool.
What are you over there for exactly?
Just to see a couple Yankee games. The Yankees are in town against the Pirates for 2 games, so we just decided to take a quick family vacay and enjoy the city of Pittsburgh. So yeah, it should be fun.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The Garrett Cole Bowl is those 2 games.
Yeah, I don't think Garrett Cole, unfortunately, is pitching in either one of these. I think it's Jamison Tyone and Luis Severino.
Oh, Jamison Tyone Bowl too.
So there you go. You got at least Tyone, which, knowing how this is going to go, he's probably going to pitch like really well tonight.
Yeah.
Well, to start the show, first of all, welcome our buddy Neil Villapiano from Devil's State of Mind. So, yeah, it's nice to finally have a you were one of our first Twitter follows, man.
I mean, that's usually how it goes, right? Like, you find something on social media, you follow it, and then, you end up having this kind of like this good connection. And I think one of the first things that kind of like piqued my interest was the logo that you guys have for the podcast, which I think is great.
Yeah, thank you.
And I've always had somewhat of a level of respect and interest in the Columbus Blue Jackets, just because they play in a non-hockey market, and it's always kind of thing. And they've built a really, really cool culture over there and a following that I think is absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I'm definitely and I like to keep my eye on all of my Devils opponents. So
yeah,
I'm sure you do. I know he looks a little not synced up. He's obviously in the car, so this is a lot like when we had Mike on, which you guys I'll link to the Mike Todd episode when we're done with this. But this is our draft preview show.
Yes, and it's interesting that you are our 3rd guest, and we've had more Devils guests on than Blue Jackets guests.
Well, I mean, to be fair, our situation's a little bit more interesting in the draft than maybe Columbus at the moment. So I can understand.
I would say so, because there's so much uncertainty going around, specifically with the 2nd overall pick.
Right.
As of right now, it's very torn. I can't remember the last time it was maybe this torn. Maybe 2017 when you got Hischier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Between 1 and 2, because that was the debate of, is it Hischier, is it Nolan Patrick? And thank God you didn't pick Nolan Patrick.
I think so. The biggest things to come out of this year's draft that I think we need to hit over the next hour and a half or whatever are obviously the top 10, 10 to 15. Is what's Columbus going to do with 6 and 12? What do the Devils do with number 2? I really want to get your take on that.
Yeah.
Now.
Which is, it's so dependent on what Montreal does at number 1.
Mm-hmm. So those 2,
right, absolutely. Yeah, I mean it. Mm-hmm.
So all of that is really what we need to hit.
It's been the back and forth since the Devils, got what's it called? When they got the 2nd overall pick. Because again, when the draft lottery came around, none of us, with the Devils, we expected to get, top 3. We expected to stay at 5 and be like, okay, that's where we're going to go. That's where we're going to rock and roll from there. And especially when, our general manager, Tom Fitzgerald, is talking about moving our first round pick, it might have been a little bit easier to maybe find a deal that we like for the 5th overall pick than maybe for the 2nd overall pick. But once we moved up to number 2, it was kind of that decision right off the bat that I said, you know what, I don't really think that pick's going to end up getting moved. I think that nobody's really going to come to the table with the Devils and say, hey, we have an offer for you that you cannot refuse that involves the 2nd overall pick. And obviously it's going to be more than just, number 2 overall. But I think that, since we got the 2nd overall pick, it's more been a question, like you guys mentioned, who are the Devils going to get? And quite frankly, I think that they're going to end up taking the best player on the board, whoever that might be. And I know things have kind of flip-flopped.
Isn't that how it always is?
Oh, yeah, of course. Every single draft. Because if you think about it, not just the 2017, as Jay mentioned, but also if you go back to 2019, I mean, even though obviously it made a lot of sense and we see what Jack Hughes has done, there were still question marks about, was Jack Hughes going to go number one or was it going to be Capo Caco? It was definitely a question, there were certain question marks back and forth when it came to that. So
yeah, now that I think about it, Caco was, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so there was that type of situation. So I think when you go into this one, the Devils, they're kind of in the good spot because then they're just like, okay, well, we'll just allow what, Montreal to pick whoever they want and do whatever they want to do, and then kind of go from there. And I think the Devils have a lot of backup plans if they don't get the situation that they want. I think they definitely want Juraj Slafkovsky. I think they love the kid. They saw what he did in the Olympics. They saw what he did in the World Championships, and they're very, very, very high on him. And he fits a need, a top 6 scoring left winger, a guy who could potentially jump into the Devils lineup from day one and really, really take off. I know people are comparing him for reasons that I don't fully understand to Capo Caco back in 2019, and it's kind of weird that they would kind of use that comparison, I guess, just because of the European situation. And I know that his stats in his professional league are not, blowing you away and everything. But I think when you look at the fact that he played against a lot of men in the Olympics, he also played in the World Championships against a lot of NHL players and had a ton of success, that I think he has shown, I think he has proven that he is going to be a very, very good player in his own right. And then speaking of right, you look at Shane Wright and you say, he fits more of a need for the Montreal Canadiens. They need a top center. And if you allow the Devils to then potentially draft Shane Wright, you have Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, and Shane Wright as your 3 centermen, which is kind of unfair in many ways if you really look at it. Like that's really just giving the Devils an opportunity to do some unbelievable things with the maneuvering of their offensive, their forward lines. And then
versus having Wright and then Nick Suzuki in Montreal,
exactly.
right?
Right, and I think Montreal should try to take a page out of the Devils' book and say, look at what the Devils have. They have Jack Hughes and Nico Hischier as their top 2 centers, 2 guys that are tremendous in their own right. We could build our team very similar to them by having 2 really good top centers in Shane Wright and Nick Suzuki. And I think Slafkovsky has proven that he probably is the best player overall in the draft, but sometimes you don't end up taking necessarily the best player in the draft. You take more of the player of need. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I think for Montreal's case, they would probably be better off, drafting Shane Wright. I do think that ends up being the case once we hit Thursday. And I really do believe the Devils will take Slafkovsky. But it's definitely been back and forth, that's for sure. Once Bob McKenzie's final rankings came out, that really got people's attention.
Yeah. My question for you real quick. I'm sorry to cut you off.
That's fine. Go ahead, Bob.
Talk about the importance of center depth. I think back to like 2009 with the Penguins when they had Crosby, Malkin, and third line, they had Jordan Stahl.
Right.
You look at the Blackhawks when they're championships, their depth down the middle. The Kings. There's a lot of different examples. I think the Lightning right now with Stammer, Point, and Sorelli. Is there any chance in your mind, if the Habs do go as Shane Wright, that the Devils take a look at Logan Cooley at number 2?
I think that they've definitely talked about it. I think that he's a guy that a lot of people see he could potentially be the most polished player in this draft, and the upside that he has is really, really good. And whoever gets him is going to be very, very happy. But again, the Devils may look at it more as Montreal would look at it as more of a positional need. And so they may not necessarily want to. And the other thing is this. If, let's say, for instance, Arizona calls the Devils when they have when they get to the second overall pick and say, hey, we really like Logan Cooley. Why don't we try to do a trade where we just kind of flip picks? Maybe the Devils get an extra pick or whatever, in that deal. And then the Devils drop down. And then let's say Arizona takes Cooley at 2 and Slafkovsky goes 3. That's always something that you think about. Doesn't happen very often, but it's possible.
Right.
But as far as, go ahead, Jake.
It's so many drafts, at least that in my experience, we've had consolidated a 1, 2, 3, right? And this one is one of those years, like a 2017 where it's really not a consensus number one.
Mm-hmm.
And the top three, obviously, I think 1, 2, and 3 are more or less solidified. It's just where do these three go?
Right. It's more of the order, not necessarily the players that are there. And then once you get past the top three, then it's about, it's anybody's guess, basically. It's just wherever we want to go, with that. I know from looking at enough mock drafts that, like, using the Blue Jackets as an example, they've been rumored to take about 7 or 8 different players from what I've seen.
There's I know there's a lot of from Svoboda and a few of the other insiders. I know our buddy Mark had a few articles out, and there's there are a lot of options, especially at 6.
Yeah, and I think similar to, like, we say, like, the top 3 is determined, not in terms of order, but like the players. I think 4 to 6 are kind of in the same mold where it's going to be Simon Nemec, David Jiricek, and Cutter Gauthier. We just don't know the order because, I think Seattle's going to take one of Nemec or Jiricek. Don't know which. I think they learn Nemec at this point.
I think they prefer Nemec, yeah.
But I mean, the Flyers, they have a couple different. They could use a defenseman like David Jiricek. They could also use a goal scorer like Cutter Gauthier.
Well, that's the thing too. Is
the other thing I would say. No, go ahead, Jake.
Are we gonna, how many of these teams are going to decide, at least with their first rounders, are we going to draft based on need, or are we going to take just whoever's best?
And that's a good question. I mean, I think that generally speaking, when you go to the top 10, especially in this case, we're talking 1 to 6 here. More often than not, you are going to go with, what your biggest need is. And that's what I think the Blue Jackets would do if they're getting David Jiricek at 6, if they luck into that, because their biggest need is they need a right-hand defenseman to play with Zach Werenski. They don't have one right now. Boakfist has potential, Peak has potential, but they don't have a true right-hand shot first pair defenseman on their roster.
Blankenberg has potential, but again, he's really, really young.
Yeah, and I like Blankenberg too, but we don't want to thrust him into that role. But like, if you're talking like picks like 15 to 30, or you get into the second round, you take the best player available, whoever has the most ups.
Yeah, and it depends on your draft board as well. I think and I was talking about this in my last podcast episode, that everybody's draft board is different. Everybody has guys ranked higher or lower than other teams, and it's going to be just a matter of where when they get to whatever pick they're at, whether it's at the bottom of the first round or beyond that, it's the second, third, fourth round. It's a matter of, okay, where do they have this guy ranked? And if he's the top player, available right now on our board, then we got to go take him regardless of position. Because again, you also are stockpiling the depth that you have throughout your entire organization. And so that's a kind of another thing to look at. And I mean, the whole thing, when you look at, right after the top 3, it's again the same thing of, we know the next 3 players that are going to be the next guys that can get taken. It's a matter of the whole preference of what teams are looking for. And for me personally, I look at Columbus and I see them getting a guy like Cutter Gauthier, although I do believe that they do need to add the center depth on the right side. I don't think that, but the question is this: is there any defenseman on that right side in this draft that you feel comfortable maybe potentially coming in and playing in the NHL right away? Because again, we don't even know how many guys are actually going to be NHL ready this year. I think the only 2 guys that I feel confident enough that could play in the NHL right away are the top 2 picks in Shane Wright and Juraj Slafkovsky. And that's no knock on Simon Nemec. It's more of just, I think Nemec just needs a little bit more time.
Maybe Cooley.
Yeah, I think Cooley definitely gives himself a shot. It depends on how he does in training camp. I think that's the way you got to look at it. Because I think he'll get a shot in training camp, and then you see how he goes from there. Because here's an example. I'll give you a good example. Dawson Mercer, who was drafted in 2020 by the New Jersey Devils. First year he came over from, he came into training camp. He was the best player of our entire team. And then he ended up playing the entire year in New Jersey this past year, played all 82 games, and really, really proved himself to be a guy that can play in the NHL on a daily basis. So, there are guys that maybe you don't fully expect to get an opportunity right away, but they certainly can. So I think it's more interesting. But yeah, it's not that I'm not interested in where the Devils are going to go with the second overall pick, because I am, because obviously I am a fan and I cover the team. But I am intrigued to see after the top 5-6 picks, where do we go from there? How many moves happen? We're still talking about the potential of maybe Alex DeBrincat getting moved for the 5th overall pick from Philadelphia. That was something that was brought up, which, I mean, from the Devils' perspective, if they get DeBrincat, then that leaves us open to then have very little to no competition to get Johnny Gaudreau if we really do want to make a push for him. Although I still wonder where the cap space is coming from Philadelphia. So
Johnny going home would be interesting.
Their cap space would be coming from dumping a guy like James Van Riemsdyk, which has been talked about, them trading assets to get rid of that contract, presumably.
I know Seattle wants him. I know Seattle wants JVR. So but again, if you're Seattle, do you help out Philadelphia right away, or do you try to twist their arm? Let's say, you know what I mean? Because again, that was definitely Seattle's another wild card team in the Johnny Gaudreau sweepstakes because they're also like talking about, hey, we want to get a star player to come here, which my advice to them would be hold off until 2023 because there will be a lot more options in 2023. Give another year of rebuilding, get another year of stockpiling picks and things like that. And then with even more cap space next year and the salary cap going up again, go after a David Pastrnak if he's available. Go after a Patrik Kane who could potentially be available in free agency. Just some guys like that.
Yeah.
So I want to start, getting our teeth into this top 15. Because this is, a preview of the draft, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to do before I actually start with this is, so what I gather from how we've talked so far is, Neil, you think that Tom Fitzgerald is slated to keep 2nd overall, right?
Yeah, I think because, again, there really isn't going to be an offer coming up in the next couple of days that, in my opinion, is going to blow you away. And one of the things that has been talked about is that Tom Fitzgerald and his team have a list of guys that they feel are worth the 2nd overall pick trading it for. And the only problem with it is simply that none of those guys are probably going to be available to be dealt with. I mean, I look at a guy like Matthew Tkachuk that could be available, but I mean, if I don't know where they are in that situation with with regards to Calgary and Tkachuk. I look at David Pastrnak, who, if you remember, like a month ago, all of a sudden it was, Pastrnak is definitely going to leave Boston after this year.
As soon as Cassidy got fired, all of that just
Cassidy got fired, and then you saw that Don Sweeney got a contract extension to be the GM of the Bruins, and now they're bringing in Jim Montgomery, and I have nothing against Jim Montgomery. It's just more of where are the Bruins going at this point? And if you're David Pastrnak, do you really want to stay there long term, knowing that there's a lot of uncertainty with it? So there's that. But a lot of the guys you would think of that could be available for the 2nd overall pick, or that the Devils would want for the 2nd overall pick, are just not available. So
I think that there's also the case of some of the guys who are available don't have the term. Like you mentioned, Pastrnak, if he's available, you got to make that deal with the 2nd overall pick if you are certain he's going to sign an extension. Same with
if you do a sign and trade right away.
Yeah.
Or you do a sign and trade right, like, because I like using this example. If you guys remember back in 2020, right at the deadline, the New York Islanders traded a bunch of picks and things to Ottawa for John Gabriel Pajot. What happened like 30 seconds right after that?
Yeah,
he signed a 6-year extension.
Mm-hmm.
So if the Devils were to do something like that, acquiring a restricted free agent or even an unrestricted free agent star player, you better hope and you better get the opportunity to talk to the agent and the player and say, let's work out a contract extension right now. Let's get this over with. Let's not even allow this to go down, and let's go from there. And I think that's something that the Devils would be willing to do.
Kevin Fiala, a more recent example, I would say.
I think the Devils were not in on Fiala as much as people said that they were, because, again, I think that the money that Fiala was asking for was more than the Devils felt comfortable giving. Because remember, we still have to sign Jesper Bratt, who, in my opinion, is at the same level as Kevin Fiala.
I would agree with that.
And here's the good thing about Fiala getting extended like that is that it gives Bratt, and it also gives the Devils an opportunity to use it as an example and say, let's go based off of this and let's work out a deal that way.
Right.
So it's kind of a good thing in
Fiala setting the market definitely throws in, something into the ring there.
Right.
The same way that like the Hughes and Heischer extension sets it like internally, like so many people, like, if we think about Boston, like you're really going to make more money than, say a Patrice Bergeron or Brad Marchand. It's tough to negotiate with those kind of deals on the books that are so the Hughes contract is unbelievable. The Heischer contract's really good. So it's hard to kind of get that money, even coming off of a great season like Jesper Bratt just came off of, because you can't justify making more money than those two guys.
Fiala making 7.9, definitely says to me, what is this going to mean for a guy like Jesper Bratt? What is this going to mean for a guy like Patrik Laine? For just to use our teams as, our top RFAs that we need to sign.
Right.
What do we do?
I guess I'd look at it just from Jesper Bratt's perspective, and I would say that it allows the Devils to then look at it and say, okay, we could probably go 7.5, because we personally feel like you're at the same level as Kevin Fiala. We feel that Kevin Fiala just asked for more than he's actually worth. And I think that that's the way we got to look at it. And the only thing that I will say is this. Go back to the contract extension that Andrei Svechnikov signed with Carolina. To me is actually the best example of what the Devils could talk to Bratt about and try to get him to negotiate something like that. I'm not saying that Bratt is at the same level as Andrei Svechnikov. I'm looking at it more of the contract. And here's the other thing. Me personally, Jack Hughes by far is the best player on our team. By far, superstar in the making. I don't think anybody can debate that. Nico Heischer, very good player in his own right. I think Jesper Bratt is a little bit better than where Nico Heischer is. So in my opinion, I think you try to find a middle ground where you try to give him not as much Hughes money, but more, Nico, a little
somewhere
bit more
in the middle,
Nico,
right?
Exactly. And I think that that's where we're going to get to. And I know Devils fans are panicking on social media and things like that, saying, oh, it's the week of the draft and Jesper Bratt is still not signed. And I'm like, there was one RFA that has signed, and that was Brock Besser. And he signed a bridge deal. He didn't even sign a long-term deal. Yeah. So these things, when you're signing a long-term extension, these things take time. Jack Hughes and Nico Heischer, it wasn't like it took them 5 minutes to get a contract extension. I'm sure this was talked about for weeks, months, maybe even a year. And we just weren't we just didn't hear anything about it. So I think from that, and then with Patrik Laine, I will just say this. I just don't want to see him sign another 1 year prove-it deal, because the man has proved enough over the last 3 years that he deserves to be paid. I think the question that I have is simply that, what is his feeling about Columbus long-term? Like, where are they at right now? Because if you remember how much he was upset with the way Winnipeg was doing things, and Winnipeg, was really, really doing a lot, and they still have a lot of talent over there. But you look at Columbus, and I'm sure Laine's seen it, guys like Panarin, Bobrovsky, even Matt Duchene, who they got in the deadline, all those guys ended up leaving. They didn't even come close to coming back. So I think that's more of a question of, does Laine feel comfortable being here long-term, which I would say I really, really believe in the GM of the Blue Jackets, because I believe in what he's trying to do. And I think Laine should sign there long-term, because I think he would really, really help that team.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point that you bring up. It's tough with the whole, Duchene and Bobrovsky thing, because Duchene was a rental.
We knew he wanted to go to Nashville anyway.
So that was never, because if we had signed him, we would have had to given up another first-round pick to Ottawa. That was part of the trade. That was the conditional pick. But the other thing with Bobrovsky is he did sign a couple of extensions with Columbus. It's just they didn't want to pay him the money, because he got $10 million from the Panthers, and they knew they had Elvis on the way, and Jonas Korpisalo was already in the organization.
Yep.
But you are correct with, you look at a guy like Panarin, and further back, the one that hurts the most, I think, for Blue Jackets fans is, more importantly, Jeff Carter.
How many times have we talked about the Jeff Carter trade, Jay? Oh my God!
Because it's so important to the franchise's history, because that's the biggest example of trading a lot of assets to get a very good player who just didn't want to play for your organization, and it screwed you. Yeah. I don't think Patrik Laine is in that boat. I think Patrik does want to be there.
Like, on camera, he says he loves it in the city. He says the teammates have really helped him out.
Yeah.
bringing in a guy like Jakub Voracek to be his right-hand man absolutely helps. As far as the contract goes, though, I think the fact that the qualifying offer being 7.5 is probably going to be, the start of where this goes. Yeah. And the fact that things are stalled out right now says to me that he wants long-term.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And the other thing with Laine that I think is interesting is like he's kind of a very, very laid back personality.
Oh yeah,
100%.
Very laid back too. And I feel like a lot of players, when you think about the National Hockey League and you can go here or there, like a lot of people will bring up the bigger organizations. People want to play for the Rangers or the Canadiens, the Maple Leafs, the Kings, et cetera, et cetera. I think Patrik Laine fits a very laid back market, and I think that's part of why I'm confident he enjoys playing in Columbus, because he doesn't have the pressure of playing for the Blue Jackets the way he did a Canadian market like Winnipeg.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think, the thing about Laine is that, we've never heard him talk about, wanting to play for a big time team or a big city. He's really the main thing that he cares about is being, paid the amount that he feels that he's worth. And he's a very good player in his own right, a goal scorer, a guy who, he has been criticized for, things like the lack of defensive presence and things. And you guys have heard it all. I mean, it's not like I'm not saying anything. Right. Yeah. You can see it. You can see it on the end. And it's not a big deal, because if you have really good defensive forwards surrounding him, so what? He's the one guy that doesn't play defense. Cry me a river, so to speak. It's like,
I mean, that's why he works so well with Boone Jenner.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just kind of, it's one of those things where I would look at it from Laine's perspective and say, I think if they, just like with Jesper, Bratt, and the Devils, I think they will get a deal done. It's just a matter of, it's going to take time, and it's just going to be about hammering out the money per year. But no signs have pointed to me that he wants to leave or that he wants to stay either. It's kind of like, because like you mentioned, Jay, he's a very laid back guy who doesn't really I don't think he likes to get into the media and tell everybody what he likes and doesn't like. That whole stuff that happened when he was talking to that Finnish reporter about how he didn't want to be in Winnipeg, he seemed to be pretty pissed off that actually came out.
Yeah, how much of that had to deal with Scheifele and Wheeler, though?
Well, and now look at this. Now all of a sudden, the Jets want Scheifele out, and they want Pierre-Luc Dubois out. And if you remember, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, somebody put out an article that was talking about the fact that what was it called? That the locker room in Winnipeg is like very, very bad, and like it's not the team base, so to speak. And maybe Patrik Laine was onto something. Maybe he knew well before anybody else that something was up there. But I mean, look, if he enjoys playing in a city like Columbus, and Columbus is a city that loves its team, and you guys know this, obviously, loves its team, loves what they bring to the table, then I think he would probably get on board with that.
Yeah.
I'm also just walking around outside my hotel, so so everybody's getting
everybody's getting a hotel tour. Here we go.
This is such a unique I don't think I've ever done this before, where I'm like in the middle of traveling and this is going on. So
no, I remember when we had Mike on, he was on his way to his day job.
Yeah, he was driving. That one was kind of wild because he cut out every once in a while.
It was a lot of fun though. He was great. So so getting into the top 15, what I have pulled up is who is this? Shoot. I have the Athletic rankings from Corey Pronman that just came out earlier today.
Yeah.
So here's the Devils taking David Urich with the second overall pick, which was kind of like, wow, it's a stretch.
So what Pronman has, and I'm probably just going to go through, who he's got ranked where, and the comparable player, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So he has Pronman to start has Slav going first. He's got Juraj Slafkovsky going to Montreal.
Fair. That's fair.
And he compares, Jay, you'll like this. He compares Slafkovsky to number 61.
Yeah, I can see that. The size, the reach, and I do understand a little bit the comparisons to Capo Caco, not in the sense of play style, but more so just they're both players who played for Turco TPS in the Finnish league. So, and I do think like when you talk about the point totals for Slafkovsky in that league, yes, you're correct. He's playing against them. Also playing for a team that wasn't very good this past year. So I think that affects it too.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I think that, just the big body presence and things like that, I can see why they would probably use that comparison. I don't know if Columbus is going to be able to move up to get a guy like that who could be the next 61, but I could definitely see how people, want to move Slafkovsky up to 1 because of the potential that he brings to the NHL, what he can do when he's at the top of his game.
Yeah, the next Rick Nash is going to be hard to come by, and
that's for sure.
I think that's just like the
I'm
best.
so glad they retired his number, by the way.
Oh yeah, we had fun with that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Jay, you were going to say something? Sorry, bud.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, I like the comparison, not in like career projection, but more so just stylistically watching this player. I see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So number 2, Shane Wright's going number 2.
I'm sure you'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be crestfallen if we don't get Slafkovsky, because what's our backup option? Oh, we get who has been projected to be the first overall pick for the last year in Shane Wright, and we just add another elite center to a team that already has 2 elite centers.
Hughes, Keisher, Wright, like as 1, 2, 3 punches down the middle.
Oh yeah. And I love the kid's personality too. Like he's a lot like Jack Hughes. Like he has that confidence in him. He has that belief that he's going to be very, very good. And I think that that's kind of the thing that the Devils really like. And look, the Devils brought him into Jersey for like a more like close-knit interview and things like that. And so I think that they really, really think highly of him as well. And I know people are saying like, oh, the Devils won't take a center with the 2nd overall pick. Well, I mean, obviously the backup options down in it, or just, like one of the defensemen or whatever the case may be. But I think at the end of the day, I do feel that if Shane Wright's at 2, that's probably who they take. And I can understand why they would take Shane Wright at 2.
Right. Yeah. I think that
right.
I don't know if you're going to like his comparable. If he comes from a crosstown rival.
Mm-hmm.
Prodman compares him to Mika Zibanejad.
I'll take that. I will gladly take that, because I'm a very big fan of Mika Zibanejad, really. I think that he's a phenomenal player in his own right, a guy who can be a clutch goal scorer. And, if Shane Wright is even half the player that Mika Zibanejad is on the 3rd line, I will gladly take that.
I will say the one thing that I find interesting about this article, having him listed at 2, is I did hear yesterday that his interview with Kent Hughes really didn't go so hot.
Yeah, and this is something that I've heard is people are criticizing personality, not in a way. Usually when you get like a complaint about an athlete's personality, you think of like the big personalities. A lot of the criticism is people saying like, oh, he doesn't seem ultra super competitive and whatnot. But I don't think that's the worst thing, to have a quiet confidence about you and just to let your play speak to who you are.
Right. I got you. I just got my hotel room, by the way, boys.
I can tell. I could just hear it. Like I have the thing. Yeah. I have the article just in front of me, and I can just overhear that.
Yeah, you guys are getting all the sounds here. This was I'm sure you guys are enjoying every second.
This is gonna make fantastic ASMR podcast audio.
I'm sure all your fans are gonna love it. So I'm glad that I could provide it. If you guys want me to switch to my laptop at any moment, I could do that as well.
No, you're fine.
You're good, bro. No, we just appreciate your time and getting to do a little bit of networking with you has been
and I'm enjoying this, and this is a lot of fun. I always like coming on podcasts and talking, and hey, talking hockey is always something I look forward to. So
we were having a big
on that.
Yeah, Jay and I were having a big text discussion this morning over just a lot of stuff.
That's what I do with some of my Devils people. So don't worry about it. We all do it, especially now that it's draft week. So
right, exactly. Number 3 in the list, Logan Cooley is going 3, like most lists.
Yeah, I feel like that's almost the lock of the draft is Cooley going 3.
It makes sense to me, and I think that Arizona, they'll be able to use Cooley to really promote themselves while they're playing in a college stadium. And I think that him being a young player playing in a young, a college stadium might actually be somewhat marketable. But I mean that's definitely one of the more players that you could say definitively, oh yeah, like he's definitely going there unless something happens. Like
if you want marketability, if he's ready, right? If Arizona picks him and he's NHL ready right off the bat, and you want the marketability, playing in ASU, all of this in order to keep, the Coyotes afloat, put him with Clayton Keller, please.
Ooh, yes, very much so. That would be great.
I think my question, though, for Cooley is what's his plan? Because he is committed to the University of Minnesota. So I get the sense that he's going to be a guy, no matter what, who's going to play at least 1 year of college before coming pro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think he'll take the same route that like Luke Hughes is doing right now, where he takes a year or two in college, and then when the time comes and they really, really want him to come over, then he comes over and plays. I like we talked about earlier, we don't really see a lot of guys in this first round that we feel like, okay, definitely can make an NHL roster right away. I think Cooley is on the fence, and it just depends on how he does in training camp, wherever he goes. But I think that he gives himself a fair shot. But you definitely bring up a good point, Jay, about where does he see himself going right now? Does he see himself going to college next year because he's committed? Or, what's going to happen if he goes to training camp, he plays well, and then the Coyotes say, hey, we want you to play with us right away?
He could. His comparable's Braden Point.
I think
that is a very good comparable.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 different sides to this coin. One of them being that if you look at the center depth for Arizona as of right now going into next year under contract, it's Nick Schmaltz and Travis Boyd.
Oh, right.
So when you ask the question, can he make an NHL roster? It's not making an NHL roster. It's making the Coyotes roster. But at the same time, Logan Cooley's a good player. At the same token, he's a guy who can help the Coyotes win games. But the question is that what they want?
Right.
That's the thing. And
is it possible they let him play college hockey with the hopes that, hey, we want to kind of suck next year so we can also get a Connor Bedard or Matvei Michkov?
That's a good point. And look, I mean, we know how deep that 2023 class is after even after those first 2 guys you mentioned, Jay.
It's unbelievable.
There are what a lot of people are saying potentially could be as good as, what was it, the 2003 class? I was just trying to remember which class.
2003,
Adam Fantilli, I think, is really good. And
they were, I mean, that's going to be a class that a lot of people are going to be looking at. And you bring up a good point, Jay. They may just be very honest with Logan Cooley and say, look, we're going to suck. We want to suck because we want to get more talent. You already know, we're very high on you. Don't think that like we're doing this because we don't think you could play in the league. We certainly think you can. Go to college, go win a national championship, have a good time. Don't worry about us. We're trying to get stuff going. We got a new stadium coming up, in the next couple of years.
Whenever that deal gets done.
Have fun. Play with the guys.
I mean, at least the plans got approved, right? That's a
step.
Yeah, that's the big thing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm trying to get my mind right again, because I was gonna say something about, I was gonna make a quip about the Coyotes or something, and then I just lost my train of thought. But okay, so back to the list, just to try to keep this rolling, I guess.
Yeah.
Number 4, which is Seattle, right?
Yep.
Yes.
Seattle's got 4. Promen's got Juracek, and his comparable is Alex Pietrangelo.
Interesting.
I mean, Petrangelo's kind of a big body defenseman in his own right, a guy that, we never can consider. I would consider, Pietrangelo much more of a two-way defenseman. Jurich to me is a little bit more of a defensive defenseman. But I guess they see the big body frame and they're like, yeah, I think, he kind of fits that mold, so to speak. But I see that's where I would kind of start to disagree with the list. And I would say that I think Nemec is number 4, not Jurich. I don't know. I mean, granted, Jurich's name has come up much more in the rankings over the last couple of weeks, just based off of things we've heard and stuff like that. But, if and granted, this is with every single player that's getting compared to someone else in the National Hockey League. If they live up to even half of the player that comparable is, that's a really, really good pick. So, but again, I personally would put Nemec at 4, but I can understand also why people might want to say Jurich at 4.
Funny you bring up Nemec because Nemetz is slated in this to go at 5 to Philly. And I like his comparable because
I don't like that.
His comparable is someone that we don't pay as much attention to as we really kind of should anymore. Mackenzie Weegar.
Yeah, I like Weegar. I was thinking for a year just to bring him up. I think my comparable, and maybe it's just because he's Slovak and he's 6'3" and right hand shot defense. But like stylistically, when I watch him, I think he kind of reminds me of a little bit of another, and to keep it reasonable, Eric Chernak.
Juracek?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can see that because
a little bit more upside offensively,
yeah.
but that's kind of what I get from his game. Which I mean, if you pick a guy, if the Blue Jays were to pick him at 6, and it's the result, a player who's very similar to Chernak, I would take it.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point. And I think that's I think at that point, if you're Philly and Nemec is there at 5, I think unless you're getting Alex DeBrincat, you'd be stupid not to take him.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And you need a lot, and the Philly needs a lot of different things.
Yeah. And I mean,
it's really fun knowing that Philly needs a lot of help in a lot of different ways.
I mean, it's not as fun when you factor in the Fedotov situation, but
that's unfortunate. Well, that's it. That I was disregarding that more than because again, with that situation, it's not really the player's fault. It's more he got given an unfortunate situation, and then he got in trouble. It was like, do you guys remember the goaltender from Minnesota State? Remember his situation?
Oh yeah,
where
the kid that just won the Hobie Baker, right?
Yeah. And then he signed with the Leafs, I believe. Yeah, he had a similar situation. Well, obviously he didn't have a reaction to it, but he got given illegal stuff, and then afterwards it was later discovered that he had no idea that was the case. Ugh. And I mean, we always look at it and say, well, did they really not know what they were getting themselves into? And I think in some cases they didn't. And you look at the Flyers situation with that goaltender, and I think that was more of he really did not know what was going on, and he got put into a very unfortunate situation.
Poor kid. Yeah. Anyway, so number 6, Columbus's pick. Pronman's got us taking Cutter Gauthier, Jay. And they
I would be against it because again, that's more goal scoring help.
And you're gonna like his comparable too, a guy that could be on the outs, JT Miller.
Yeah, I could see that too. He's a really good player. And I think Cutter Gauthier is going to be like maybe one of the steals of the draft in terms of where he goes, because I don't see him going in the top 4. I think he's going to go in that 5 to 7 range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think for a player in the 5 to 7, like when we look back on this draft, he might be a top 3 player in the draft.
I did tell Jay earlier too that like Cutter, is that not one of the best friggin' first names in this entire
How can you name Cutter Gauthier and not be like a walking 30-goal scorer in the National Hockey League?
Oh, he's a guy that definitely is going to come in like when he's playing at the prime of his career. He's going to be like a 35, 40 goal scorer. Like he's going to be so marketable to the NHL because of his first name. And I remember the first, like when I was first looking at, the players like a couple months ago. Interestingly enough, it was in December when I knew we weren't making the playoffs. But that's besides the point. It was more of like, I saw that name and I'm like, if the Devils draft, like if the Devils are there, like if that, if in that position, draft him for nothing else than just his name, because that's great. But no, he's a really good player to start. And I really love Jake. I really love the JT Miller comparison, and it has everything to do with his body frame, the way he shoots the puck, his speed. Especially like I saw him play a couple of times, and what's more impressive to me is the speed that he can create with the puck as opposed to without the puck. We could see guys, flying around the ice without the puck, but there's not a lot of guys that we can say are really, really elite skaters when it comes to skating with the puck. I mean, the first guy that comes to my mind is quite frankly Connor McDavid. We know what he can do.
I mean,
once he gets the puck on his hands, but I look at Cutter Gauthier and I say, this is a guy that he's flying all over the ice, and a guy who is not afraid also to bang the body, which I think is a really good thing as well.
Like a Nathan McKinnon, he's also one of those guys that's really extremely fast once he's got the puck on his stick, and always dangerous to throw a hit, always dangerous to do just about anything.
Absolutely.
Number 7, which, oh my gosh, I keep having to go back and forth on the draft order. 7 is Ottawa. They've got Joakim Kemmel. And he's drawing comparisons to Arvidsson.
Yeah, his stock has dropped a little bit after this last season. Same with him and Brad Lambert, it seems.
Well, kind of so did Shane's, because there are a lot of players in this draft that, obviously due to the pandemic, didn't get to play.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we have to remember how much this is a stats league, by the way. And I don't like it that way, but a lot of the time, like, why do you think Slafkovsky gets criticized and why people think he's going to be a bust? Look at his stats at TPS. Oh, they don't blow you away at all. And I'm like, why don't you look at the body of work full through and through and go from there? Capo Kakko had really good stats when he was playing overseas, and then he came over here and he wasn't the same guy. So, I mean, and that's kind of the situation here. And that's where you'll see guys' stock get dropped, like this guy right here. It's more of lack of playing time and also lack of getting really good opportunities to, add up to the score sheet. But he's still a very good player in his own right.
Yeah, the talent's still there, I think.
Yeah.
I would say that another thing is, I think, and we've seen this recently, that I think is interesting, is the top players in the draft. It's not like, growing up where there's so many years, from say 2005 till 2014 where you're a top 8 pick and you're almost playing immediately. We haven't really seen that as much lately. It's almost been, there's more development in a lot of these guys, because even look at the top players. If you look at the last, say, 4 years from 2018 till now, a lot of the guys who were drafted really, really early, some of them played, some of them didn't. And even
unless you're a guy like Cole
didn't
Sillinger.
Produce a ton immediately.
I got to shout out our boy Sillinger for that, just being
and there's a reason
exception
that
to the rule.
So eye-catching for so many people across the league. I mean, it's not like he blew you away. He had 15 goals in 60. That's good season. But the reason
he's
he
also just turned 19.
Expected it. 12th overall picks don't play immediately sometimes they used to.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the NHL is a lot deeper than it was 30 years ago. And I think that a lot of these teams, especially teams that are rebuilding, they're not going to rush these players into the NHL. And that's kind of the way you look at it. And I look at these situations and I say, whoever's going to get picked between, let's go with, after the top 3.
Unless you're Chuck Fletcher.
That's true. Very true. That you're not going to, the expectation for a lot of these guys are going to get picked in the mid to late first. You're not playing in the NHL right away. Unless you somehow blow away. If you get an invite to training camp and you come out like a house on fire and you develop things right away, you're not going to. And I think that what's so interesting about some of the teams is that, quite frankly, they're able to, have a lot of, they do have a lot of depth, especially when you get picked by certain teams. So that's kind of the way that I look at it.
I also think it's just, it's almost similar now to how baseball teams operate, in that you don't want to bring up a player too early because of service time. I think that also factors in, where there's sometimes teams, look at like the Sabres.
Oh my gosh.
They bring in Owen Power like later on, and like they sign him, so they burn a year of his ELC so they can extend him. But there are other teams that don't do that. They'll make the player sit the full year before they sign him, even if they're ready, so they can get 3 full years of the ELC, especially if they're trying to be competitive. So that might be a situation that we see with the Philadelphia Flyers, because even though they're not really, in my opinion, a Stanley Cup contender, they're going to try to be under Chuck Fletcher because he's trying to save his job.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And that's all that Chuck Fletcher can do right now, because he knows if the Flyers don't do any better and show any progression this season, he is definitely getting canned.
Especially with Claude Giroux gone.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And there's no way he comes back either.
Anyway, okay, so number 8, which is Detroit's pick, a guy that really, really dropped through the rankings. Like, I remember, just 2 months ago when this guy was slated to go at the very least top 5, Matt Savoy.
Yes.
And he's drawing his comparables, decent forward, Jaden Schwartz.
Yeah, it's not bad. I like that. I guess I'll start with this one. Matt Savoy is a guy that, like you just mentioned, a guy who was much higher in the rankings when we were talking about this. Like, if you went back a year ago, Matt Savoy was a guy that was like a top 5 pick.
Mm-hmm.
And he's another one of those cases where lack of playing time, and also for him in general, it just seemed like he kind of took a step back just from there. But like Jay mentioned before, with a lot of these guys, the talent is still there. It's still a guy that can really, really produce. I think he's definitely a long-term project. Let me put it that way to you. He's a guy that's going to take a couple of years to get fully going.
Yeah, the talent's there. I mean, like the production's really not different in terms of just point totals. When you look at Shane Wright and him, Shane Wright had 94 points in 63 games, 32 goals.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at, Matthew Savoy, 90 points in 65 games, 35 goals. So it's not like there's a huge difference between those two, but obviously you look at the defensive prowess of Shane Wright, the NHL readiness, there is a little bit of a difference there, but he does have the tools. So I do like Matthew a lot.
Again, losing playing time and forces outside of our control and all of this stuff.
Yeah, I think COVID has a big impact on this. I really do. It changes the perception for a lot of different people because they lost so much time to develop, last year.
I think that's going to happen at the very least for 22 and maybe through 2024's draft.
It's fair, because by the time we get to like 2025 is when, we're really, really back into the regular role of guys, playing, full seasons and not worrying about craziness like pandemics and stuff like that. But yeah, between like now and like 2024, like you said, Jake, I think is when, we're still going to be not fully sure, but, it's going to improve with regards to, the amount of data and things that these teams can collect for these players.
Right. With scouts actually able to go to games now. And yeah. So keeping up with the list, I'm going to just speed run the rest of this because we've been deep diving into a lot of these guys. So number 9 is Marco Kasper. His comparable is Sam Bennett.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good one. I like it.
Interesting.
He's got the same type of, he plays the same type of way that Bennett does.
Yeah, he's got like similar to some of the other foreign forwards that we've been talking about, where the stats don't jump off the page, but you have to look at the overall body of work and also just the play style.
You have to really just see how he plays. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Number 10 is Danila Yurov, and his comparable is Troy Terry.
Interesting.
He's a sneaky player. He's a really sneaky player that, like, again, another guy that I think is long term, but I think if he's in the right system and he's developed properly, could be a guy that could be very, very lethal, and a guy that we don't hear about for a couple of years, but all of a sudden we'll go back and say, oh, what a great pick that so-and-so made when bringing him in. So that's kind of the way I look at it with him.
I will say that this draft and this next draft are going to be these 2 drafts are going to make me feel so old.
Oh yeah, I could definitely
because
agree with that.
Next year's draft are going to be kids that are all around my first younger brother's age, and I'm just thinking, what happened?
That's how I feel. That's how I feel now watching Nico Hischier, because like now it's like 5 years into it, and I'm like, oh yeah, like he's still younger than I am, and he was drafted 5 years ago, and that's just like absurd.
It's like Jay and I watching Cole Sillinger, and then like trying to watch Austin Matthews at the same time. It's like Austin's like right around my age. I'm thinking, what?
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
It's just like where does time even go, right?
Exactly. Where does the time go?
Number 11 is Jonathan Lekkerimäki. His comparable is interesting. Jordan Eberle.
Ooh. Great last name, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
It's like another legendary name in this draft.
Lekkerimäki and Cutter. Just like, ooh.
It's yeah, that really rolls off the tongue.
Number 12. Okay, so this is Columbus's other first rounder.
You're wondering it.
Thank you.
You having fun over there, Neil?
Oh yeah, we're having fun. We're having fun here.
July.
We're having fun. You guys are like I said, you guys are getting the full behind the scenes of everything.
So basically, I forgot to even mention the draft order. So 9 through 11 would be Buffalo, Anaheim, and the Sharks, which would be new GM Greer's first pick.
Yep. Former New Jersey Devil coach as well, in case anybody wanted to know that.
We got our Devils fanalist over here.
Yeah, him and Chris Greer are related. I didn't realize that because Chris Greer is the GM of the Dolphins.
Yeah, and their father was an NFL executive for like 30 years, so it was kind of like crazy.
Yeah, weird, crazy sports family, huh?
Oh yeah, 100%.
But yeah, we'll see what Mike Greer does with 11. Number 12, GMJK could select Nathan Gauscher or Goucher.
Wow.
I don't know.
I like him.
I don't know how to pronounce this, but I mean,
big power forward, center. That would be, pretty typical of Yarmo because he's not that high on a lot of boards. At least like in terms of 12, he is projected to be a first round pick, but not like that high. But if he picked him, I'd be pretty happy with that. I like his game.
Comparable.
I mean, look,
comparable Nick Waugh.
Nick Waugh, okay, fair. And I think that, and again, this goes back to what I was saying before about how everybody's draft board is different. If Yarmo feels that he's the best player available at 12, then that's who he's going to take, regardless of what any NHL analyst or anybody like myself will say.
I think, like, for me, just personally, like if I had the 12th overall pick, a player I am confident is going to be there that I would really like to see them pick is Isaac Howard. I think Isaac Howard's going to be a very, very good player. His production for the U.S. national under-18 team was phenomenal.
This is going to be a huge draft for the development program.
It is. And he's going to Minnesota Duluth, a really good program.
771.
Like Isaac Howard is a sleeper pick.
We can barely hear you, man.
Sorry about that.
And I don't want to blame Neil, but
you can though.
So moving along, number 13 would be the Islanders pick, and they've got Ivan Miroshnichenko.
No, with the 13th overall pick, they're going to be selecting Josh Anderson.
He's getting comparisons to Gabe Landeskog, Stanley Cup champion.
That's a very good comparison. It's a very good one.
I think what's interesting about this, and it's an unfortunate situation, and we've seen it happen before, it comes and goes, is how are the Russian players going to be selected in this?
Right, that's a huge thing.
Because, you look at the FedEx situation, and I know that that's kind of specific to that organization, but there's been so many questions the last couple of years with that, and I wonder if that affects this year at all in terms of how high they go. Because remember, like, I've mentioned this several times. That's, part of the reason that so long ago Nikita Kucherov went in the second round was because of the question of the willingness for some of these players to come over.
And we've had that with, Jay and I talked about this last show. Like, I think Marchenko is already over here in North America, but like, what does this mean for, already, Russian prospects that, not just either of our teams, but everybody. What does that mean for a player like Voronkov? What does that mean? I don't know, the Devils system as much, Neil, but
the guy I like Arseny Gritsyuk.
Yeah, Gritsyuk is a guy that we were already kind of having trouble with just because his KHL team really, really loves him and wants him to continue to play over there. And the Devils have been really trying to get him to come to North America. And now with the potential of the Russian government deciding that they're not going to allow potentially to not allow Russian players to return to the United States, North America, that could cause a lot of these Russian players in this draft to fall a lot, even out of the first round, because they'll say, well, we're just wasting a pick on a guy that we may never actually get to see play. And that was kind of the deal. If you remember when the Soviet Union was very, very big, that was why a lot of Russian players weren't drafted back then. Because they were never going to come over here.
A lot of Detroit's Russian 5 ended up that way with that.
Good example.
And then I think, didn't I bring up McGillney too last show?
Yeah, McGillney is, I think, one of the prime stories of it.
Yeah, bro, that's the end, and he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
just based off the story alone.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Based off this, I mean, it's ridiculous that he didn't get in again this time. I just.
Same with Eliash.
We talked about.
Don't even get me started with Patrik Eliash. Don't even get me started with that.
Oh. Somebody struck a nerve over here.
I'm on your side.
No, I know you guys are.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating with that.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating with that.
14 to Winnipeg. They've got Denton Matachuk.
Okay.
So Brad Lambert really falls this far. That's what we're saying.
I think he's going to fall to that 14 to 16 area.
And Matachuk's getting comparisons to Shane Gostisbehere. Interesting.
Do they? I'm just trying to remember. Do they play the same left side? Are they both left shooting defensemen? I was just trying to remember.
I'm not entirely sure.
I want to say he does.
But I mean, if we're talking about Shane Gostisbehere from like 4 or 5 years ago, okay. I mean, Gostisbehere is a pretty good. I mean,
Ghost was fine this year.
No, that's what I was going to say. He's still a solid player, but he's not where he was, if you remember, 4 or 5 years ago.
Right.
Yeah, he is a left-hand shot defenseman.
Okay, thank you.
I was just about to try to look for it myself, and I just you beat me to it. Anyway, to round out the top 15, a guy that Neil you just brought up, Brad Lambert, going 15th. And that would be Vancouver's pick.
All right. That would seem like a if Jim Benning was still the GM, that would definitely be like a Jim Benning pick. He would absolutely love it.
I think that would be a Patrik Allvin pick.
That's a good Patrik Allvin as well. I think he would definitely take a guy like that.
It's a Rutherford kind of pick too, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that would be a good a guy would be like for Brad Lambert. I think Vancouver would actually be a really good place for him to go. I like his center depth that they've got so far. Like, I think it takes pressure off of him. He doesn't have to really even come over in a year. He's a guy who can come over if they were to get him.
He'd be a decent, 2-3 center option. Maybe, it's weird though, looking at Vancouver and their centers right now with JT Miller up in the air. Obviously you have PD and you've got Bo Horvat in there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And then, the fourth line's always a revolving door, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bring Brandon Sutter back again, I'm sure.
But interestingly enough, they're comparing him to a winger. He's getting comparisons to Andre Burakovsky.
And that's a very solid comparison, considering Burakovsky just entered the prime of his career.
Yeah, and I think stylistically it makes sense. If you can get an Andre Burakovsky type player out of Brad Lambert, depending on where you pick him, but as a center, like that, you take that.
Absolutely.
That's a guy who would slot in well as your third line center behind Petey and Horvat.
Right.
Yeah, this top 15 is going to be, there's a lot of hit or miss. And again, we've talked about that with just players not getting the time due to COVID and whatever other extenuating circumstances, what have you.
Right.
A lot of that coming with the European guys, the Russian players in particular, with the conflict right now. This is 2022 is going to be a really up in the air draft.
It will be. It will, but it'll be exciting as it always is. That's for sure. Oh
yeah.
And also, we still got to figure out where Jack Hughes and Elias Pettersson get drafted in the later rounds, right? We still got to figure that out. I'm really banking on Jack Hughes to fall into the second round, so that the Devils take him at like 34 or like 38, whatever second round pick we have.
Little doppelganger action, that'd be fun.
We take Jack Hughes and then we take Elias Pettersson just because. So then we could just be like, yeah, we have names. We have big names on our team.
Now Vancouver's got to take the second Elias Pettersson. Come on, we gotta have clones everywhere.
Oh yeah, no, we just gotta have. Yeah, we definitely have to have clones.
So just to kind of wrap this up, Neil, gosh, we've been going for a little. This is one of the shorter shows we've done in recent memory, Jay.
Yeah,
we kind of breezed through this.
Well, I think that's a good thing, because if we yammer on forever about things, that's when we get into some trouble. So this actually,
we do.
I wanted to.
But yeah, can't go for too long.
Yeah, and especially with you still kind of just being everywhere.
Yeah,
right? We don't want to take up too much of your time.
Yeah, we're currently on our way to the game, so we're just dealing with traffic. But
gotcha.
And this is just a very unique way that I've done this. I've never done an interview in a car before, so it's kind of a unique thing.
Yeah, let's finish this just by I want to thank you for coming on to our little independent production right now.
Yeah.
And just talk about you and your show, and if you want to plug as much as you want, do it, because we know when we started this, you were one of the first follows we had. Jeremy and Laura over at Subjectively Speaking, a lot of the HockeyPodNet people were some of the first shows we really started to follow.
No, the HockeyPod network is really, really growing, and I've been able to have a lot of great relationships, and just being able to have the podcast that I have to talk about my favorite team and to cover them as much as I do allows me to meet great people like yourself, Jake, and as well as you, Jay. And for me, when it comes,
it's a shame Jay's not here to.
Yeah. That is true. There he is. I was going to say, all right, fair enough. But yeah, no, I appreciate you guys having me on today. And as far as the Devil's State of Mind podcast, new episodes come out every Monday and Thursday. Wherever you listen to podcasts, just search Devil's State of Mind. Our Twitter is at Devil's State. We also have an Instagram at Devil's State of Mind. And also, we do have a Facebook page as well. So make sure to give us a like over there. And you can follow me on my personal Twitter at THENVPSHOW and my personal Instagram at NVPQB11. And also, make sure to go check out the Hockey Podcast Network YouTube channel, THPN, where I'm on there quite often because I do live watch-alongs of NHL games and things like that. Right now, we're in a little bit of a break because the season just ended, but make sure you guys go like and subscribe to that, and we'll have a lot more fun here at the Hockey Podcast Network.
You are such a worse shameless plug than I am, and I thought I was bad.
It's going to be, and also, I'm going into now season 4 of the Devil's State of Mind podcast, so it's been growing every year, and I'm looking forward to continuing to see where the things go. And again, thank you guys so much for having me on today.
Yeah, we'll have to tune into you. You're gonna have to bring us on to yours.
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know what? If the timing works and everything, maybe we'll do an after the draft or free agency preview type episode, and we'll I'll have you both on at the same time.
We'll definitely keep in touch with me and keep us in mind for that. Neil Villapiano. Oh my gosh, my words are hard. Yeah. Names are hard.
It's all good.
No, thank you, Neil, so much for joining us. And make sure to follow Devil's State of Mind. Obviously, we're gonna plug us, follow us. As we continue to grow, we're heading into season 2. So we're still just kind of getting started here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And
no problem. And
we'll see how this draft goes. And Jay and I'll have a little recap and a lot more news, like the Greer hiring and whatever else comes along for Saturday. So we will see y'all later.
Jake Jackets, a podcast for fifth liners and all puckheads around. Follow the guys on Twitter at Snake Gehringer, GARRINGER, and at by J Ashdown. And subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen. March on.